At Making Medicine, we're reporting on the headlines, not making medical recommendations. For personal health questions, always consult a doctor. Nothing in this episode constitutes investment, financial, or legal advice, and please consult your own advisors before making decisions.
In your view, is the FDA functioning the way it should?
No, I'll just be blunt with that. I think it's not functioning the way that it's expected to. We're in the thick of what we quote unquote Moderna gate. Having it feel like the rug has been pulled out from under you, for the biopharma world, that's not a good thing.
Welcome back to the Making Medicine podcast, where science, policy, and innovation meet. I'm your host, John Stanford. Today's episode is another Press Pass segment, this time with Jef Akst. For those of you who don't know her, she's managing editor at BioSpace, a critical read for anyone in the industry. She's also the host of BioSpace's great podcast, The Weekly. She'll bring her perspective on what's really going on at FDA and preview a few of the stories she's hoping to write this year. Let's get into the show. Jef, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I think almost every one of our listeners has to know about BioSpace and the incredible work you do, but for the very few who might not follow you as closely as we do, talk a little bit about BioSpace and what gap in the education and media space you see it filling.
Sure. So we really do cover the business of drug development. So from soup to nuts, from those early stage new company launches, VC funding, all the way through late stage clinical trial results, FDA approvals, regulatory concerns. It's all about how do we bring new drugs to patients. We are also historically, I don't know if everybody knows this, but historically BioSpace is a longstanding job board in the biopharma industry. And so we've really added on top of that careers coverage, career advice. And then what I do in my little editorial bubble over here is that's where we focus on the coverage of the industry from a journalistic perspective.
I'm going to be totally shameless here. You also run some thought leadership and opinion content, and I mention that because you were kind enough to run a piece this week that we authored, and you can find the link to that in the description. How do you see the opinion pieces of some of the thought leaders you bring in fitting into that broader mission of BioSpace?
I love opinions. I want to hear from our readers, from folks in the industry, and from all walks of the industry. We want regulators, we want VCs, we want biotech and pharma executives, we want scientists, we want everyone contributing their thoughts about what's going on in this industry because it's massive, it's complicated, and there are lots of perspectives out there. So we do want to offer a platform for folks to communicate with each other and with their colleagues and their peers in the industry, what they see happening, what concerns they see. You've written for us a couple of times now, John, and you always are very sharp with your words. You don't hold back. And that's what we really like to see. I think that really complements, both our journalism, and then we do our own editorials as well, where we kind of put our own stamp on things, but across the board, from just reporting the facts to bringing in other folks' opinions, I think it really gives color to the industry and helps us unpack some of the challenges and the exciting things that we're seeing as well.
Well, it's certainly an outlet that cuts through the noise, and we're so grateful. You don't bury the lead at BioSpace. It's not like I have to get to the end of the article to understand what you're really talking about. And so in that spirit of not burying the lead, let's jump in with the first major question. You are covering and an expert on all things FDA. In your view, is the FDA functioning the way it should?
No, I'll just be blunt with that. I think it's not functioning the way that it's expected to. And so if things are going to change, if we are going to see an evolution of the regulatory science we have here in this country, there needs to be clear communication and transparency with the industry that it regulates. And that's where I think things are really falling short. We talk about these, quote, FDA reversals. It's the easiest catchphrase to describe what's going on. Companies being blindsided by FDA decisions. We're in the thick of what we, quote unquote, Moderna gate. We'll call it that, right? This is a very timely discussion at this moment because this is yet another one of those FDA reversals. And I'm seeing headlines. So, of course, last week when Prasad issued the refuse to file letter for the mRNA-based flu vaccine, there's all these headlines. FDA reversed its course because they had previously set out guidance, or not guidance, but advised Moderna that this was an okay trial design, and then reversed course on that and refused to review the application. But now, today, the headlines are FDA reverses course again. They are going to review the application. So this reverses course. This is a very on repeat pattern that we're seeing at the FDA right now. And I think that alone is the concern that I have. Things can change for sure. Regulatory science and regulators and policy and all of it can evolve. But having it feel like the rug has been pulled out from under you for the biopharma world, that's not a good thing.
Yeah, I want to double down there, and the reversal of the reversal. It is soap opera-esque in some way, and I mean we also saw that with personnel departures, people leaving,
Yes.
people coming back, people leaving, people coming back. What is the consequence in your mind of these? A layperson, a policymaker who maybe doesn't cover biotech as closely as you and I do. They may see, okay, the FDA said no to Moderna and then change their mind. That's fine. No harm, no foul. What's wrong with that sentiment? What are the consequences when these stunning reversals do come out? I don't think it necessarily clicks for people who aren't in the industry of like, oh, I'm sure the FDA had their reasons that Moderna didn't move forward. What would you say over a Thanksgiving table about why this is such a problem?
There's a massive ripple effect. So first, just look at the market. Look up Moderna stock and have a look at what's going on with that company. And these even leaked bits of information from the FDA can send us a stock flying or dropping. I mean, there's real market implications there. There's also timeline delays, right? So it's not just about this one flu vaccine. It's also about the flu-COVID combination and other parts of Moderna's timeline, or other parts of their pipeline, excuse me. And that timeline for all of it is shifting. So that affects their break-even guidance, which they're no longer committing to a 2028 break-even. It also affects investors looking to support not just, and now I'm getting broader, so we're not just talking about Moderna, but the entire mRNA technology, that space, the entire vaccine sector. These are all areas that will feel the ripple effect of these FDA decisions and these reversals of course. We are going to see a drop-off of investment in this space. We have now also people from the biopharma world, Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla, Moderna CEO Stéphane Bassel, they're speaking out against this. And that is quite unusual with the strong words they're using about anti-vaccine, anti-science. So it's gotten to the point where the ripple effects are so concerning that you've got what is normally a pretty politically correct or very measured discourse getting, like you said, like a soap opera and a lot of the things that these folks are saying.
Yeah, I think it's been incredible to see people speak out who historically, CEO of massive companies, your job isn't to poke the bear. It's not to speak out, but we clearly hit a pivot point, I don't know, in the last 8 to 12 weeks of sort of enough is enough from industry now really flagging these. And those ripple effects are real. I mean, from RVCs, some of them have told us, vaccines are almost uninvestable because we have no idea what the pathway forward is. And I think that's really concerning. And I wish I could say it is limited to just vaccines and maybe the politicization of vaccines, but I feel like we've also seen reversals in other therapeutic areas that also have those same ripple effects.
Absolutely. I mean, I could rattle off a number, but Replimune, Biohaven, Capricor, like all these companies are seeing reversals, unexpected changes. I think the agency in general is moving toward a more stringent approval paradigm, kind of shifting that risk benefit calculation such that they err on the side of safety. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think navigating that shift is what's causing this feeling of reversal, right? Because there's not clear communication on what the expectations are. DISC is another really interesting one. So DISC just had a rejection. They had a commissioner's national priority voucher. They got on an investor call yesterday and were trying to convince the audience, which included analysts, that they had a plan for moving forward. The phase 3 data is what the FDA needed to see. The problem is that phase 3 trial design came about and was approved by the former FDA leadership. That is no longer there. So analysts quickly picked up on that and were asking, why are you so confident that this is what the FDA now needs to see? Everything is changing, and that uncertainty is the problem.
I want to stay there for a second because I think it's important to remind people listening, these trial designs get put in place and a serious amount of time can go by when they come back saying, hey, we completed our trial. You loved how we set it up. Here's the data. We're ready to move forward. We think we've got a good case here. The window of time, if you could just hit on just how long this process is, and let's even leave the Trump administration out of it and say the next administration, whoever it may be, also wants to have an FDA that changes standards throughout. If this becomes the norm, how uninvestable does drug development become?
That's a great point, because you're right. We do change administrations every 4 to 8 years, and it is very possible that all the changes that are happening now could then be reversed. And that level of instability at the level of a national regulator, drug regulator, is hugely problematic for an investment cycle that's years, decades to be for, like I said, from soup to nuts. We like to cover it from the VC investment all the way up to, out to market dynamics. That's a incredibly long life cycle. And it's what makes biopharma kind of unique in that sense, and why a lot of the investment that has grown, that whole community that's grown up around it, has been built to weather that long-term risk. But if that long-term risk is not predictable, then you have an even greater problem.
I'm glad you used that word unique, because I do bang my head against the wall sometimes with some members of Congress who are want to see biotech like tech and are like, well, we can just develop in a different way, or, AI is going to solve all the problems and drugs are going to come to market like this. It is unique. And this is one of the only places where you're kind of locking yourself up for 10 to 15 years. So that stability, we're trying to get that word out directly, that it is becoming very difficult. And if the CEOs of the massive mega companies are willing to speak out about it, that the biotech and VC community has been concerned. I could keep you here all day on this, but I'm curious, whether it's FDA or otherwise, are there a couple of stories, one or two, that you might tease for us that you're working on that you think will be particularly interesting?
Well, certainly we've got a whole bank of FDA stories that we're pursuing. I do want to understand more about what the culture is there right now. So much has changed from the layoffs last year, basically complete revamp of the leadership at the agency. I think there's been leaks of Prasad's conduct within the agency as not being the best. So I'm curious to what it feels like to be there, and if that can inform, maybe what we'll see from the outside in the future. So definitely a little teaser there for what we want to explore. But the other one that I'll talk a little bit more about are those commissioners' national priority vouchers. For me, this is a huge question that I really want to explore further. What's going on with these? There are, the number issued last year, but we're already seeing delays across the board. DISC was the first investigational drug to be ruled on through one of these vouchers, and it was at 4 months, and the recommended, or the estimated time, was 1 to 2 months, down from the 10 to 12 that's normal, right? So even the first one out of the gate, short of that one generic antibiotic, the first one out of the gate was delayed, and the other ones are further delayed. So what is the timeline of these? How are these meeting the national priorities that have been set out? How are they being selected? How are they benefiting the companies? We're putting out a piece later this morning on some of the concerns that companies have. Should they even apply for or accept one of these vouchers? And what do they even mean? They're not codified. It was just something that the FDA said they were going to do, and then they gave out. But they're not monetizable in the way that the rare disease priority review vouchers were. So what does it even mean to be a voucher? So I feel like there's just so many questions swirling around this, ethical questions, legal questions, so much to unpack there. So that's one I want to closely track, because it's just so new, and I want to understand more about what this will mean for the industry going forward.
Well, you can count on us voraciously reading both of those pieces. That first one, the second one, these vouchers are huge. I think you said it perfectly. Should I even pursue this as a company? That's an interesting boardroom question. And then your one on the culture, I would just say, again, I think some of the attitudes for people who we kind of put scientists in a box, and I think we kind of say, does culture really matter when you walk through the doors of the FDA? You sit down, you review the data. I sometimes get the sense that people just assume scientists are going to be scientists. We all know those humans, that's not really true. If the culture there is deteriorating, how do you think it will show up on the business end of getting drugs to patients?
I think you just might see more turnover, right? Like you said, scientists will be scientists. They will just look at the data, they will review it, and they will give their honest assessment of it. But if you've got your boss looking over your shoulder and potentially overruling you on certain things, that can just cause people to not feel valued and not want to do that work and to leave. And we've already seen the effects of all of the FDA turnover, the inconsistencies, the delays, right? If that continues and we don't find that stability that everybody is so desperately seeking, then it just means more of exactly what we're talking about into the future in terms of on the business side of things, on the investment side of things, it all comes into question.
Taking a longer view, and you've been very generous with your time. So we like to close our press pass segments with this question. Whether you write it, a colleague writes it, or someone else in media covers it, between now and the end of the year, what's a piece you'd like to see people really sink their teeth into that maybe we're not thinking of right now? You know, FDA, the vouchers, those are all definitely top of mind. What do you think 6 to 8 months from now we might be talking about?
Well, let's end on a positive note. The science is better than it's ever been, and it's only going in the right direction. And there are two areas of science that I'm really particularly excited to see where they go, both in the neurospace. One is psychedelics. It's going to be a banner year for psychedelics. There's some major readouts coming out. We should expect some regulatory filings, and we may see approvals as early as next year. That will blow open this space that I think could really help some really intractable diseases. For example, treatment-resistant depression. It's right there in the name. People are not responding to treatments. They need something else. And psychedelics could be that answer. And I feel like this space has kind of been waiting eagerly since that Lycos rejection over a year ago now for something new to step up and open that door. So that's one area that I'm watching. And the other area is Alzheimer's, another incredibly a high area of unmet need. And the area that I'm specifically interested in that we've been following on is the tau space. So we have our first anti-amyloid antibodies on the market. Those are great. Some hiccups there. We won't get into the details. And there are more coming down the pike. There's a new company this morning just launched in the anti-amyloid space. But tau is another target. And the sense that I'm getting from the folks that we speak to is that Alzheimer's is not going to be, one treatment treats all. We need more options. And it's probably going to be a combination of these treatments, even for individual patients, right? So as we start to have more modalities in this space, we might actually start to see some movement in Alzheimer's, which is so desperately needed.
I love ending on a positive note. I think you're absolutely right. And I love that last point on the Alzheimer's is one drug's not enough. One drug's not going to be a cure-all. We want a whole class of drugs targeting one. That's what we've seen work in cancer and in other areas. Jef, thank you so much. This is absolutely going to be one of our best press passes, and we'll have to have you back on to share more good news later in the year.
Happy to do it. Thanks so much for having me.
A few headlines and news that we're watching. We'll start by first sharing Incubate's recently launched Most Favored Nation Tracker. The MFN Tracker is a clear data set that builds on the analysis of our life science tracker to catalog specifically how most favored nation drug pricing proposals are already showing up as a business risk across the biotech ecosystem. So what does it track? We track mentions of MFN and related international reference pricing risk in quarterly and annual SEC filings, 10Qs, 10Ks, and others, from companies both large and small. Why do we pick those to watch? Because those statements by the companies carry a lot of heft. You can't just throw in opinions or ideas. They get cleared by legal counsel and have criminal impact if you put in something inaccurate. So when a company is saying in one of these documents that MFN is a legitimate business risk for them bringing their new medicine to market, that's something notable. That's not just pie in the sky opinion, it's real fact. And what does it show in the MFN tracker? We see real-time evidence that MFN is more than an abstract drug pricing debate, and that companies large and small are flagging it as a material risk because it can compress expected returns, increase capital uncertainty, and disrupt investment and partnering decisions well before any price changes occurs. So why does this matter? Well, for small biotechs, it's causing a struggle. Early-stage pre-revenue companies are valued on future U.S. pricing expectations. And as those expectations fall, the capital feeding the pipeline shrinks. But it's not just small biotech. Large pharma is similarly constrained. MFN reduces the incentive and capacity for large companies to license, acquire, and scale new programs, and can force portfolio reprioritization away from riskier, high-impact R&D. When your wins are smaller, you can't afford to take as big of choices. So we're actually encouraging people to take smaller risk and not bring about not just new medicines, but new modalities of medicine. Uncertainty, of course, weakens the group that we pay most attention to, investor interest. When policy injects pricing volatility or uncertainty, investors reprice risk or leave the sector altogether, which reduces financing, slows clinical development, and cools the partnering and M&A from startups through large-cap biopharma. So what's the bottom line from our tracker? MFN proposals threaten to weaken the full U.S. innovation supply chain, from venture-backed discovery to large-scale development and commercialization. The result of such proposals will be fewer breakthroughs, a thinned pipeline, and weakened American leadership in biotech. On that final point, as we continue to try to compress the success of this industry, both in the U.S. market and around the world, it only further enables our adversaries, not in a capital-based system in China, to further develop their pipelines and to grow a stronger foothold. I'm asked so many times out in the field why companies feel like they have to explore the lowest cost options, whether it's in clinical trials or in licensing and acquiring new assets. One of the reasons why so many companies have to look towards China is increased policy uncertainty and pricing risk, and a codified MFN proposal would do just that. Speaking of losing that leadership, there's a striking data point that stood out to us last week in our second headline. When nearly 1,000 industry professionals were asked where they'd start their career if they were to be best positioned for success, 58% chose the United States, 27% chose Asia Pacific, mostly China, and only 9% chose Europe. Even among Europeans, just 24%, only a quarter, said they would pick Europe to have a career in the life sciences. This comes from a great article that Endpoints point out, and you can find that link in the description. What did this mean to us, and why are we focusing on it? We see it as a warning of what can happen to the United States biopharma leadership if Congress pursues policies that weaken biopharma investment and innovation. For much of the last century, Europe was the cradle of drug discovery. But since about the 1990s, that center of gravity shifted toward the U.S. It's not only research and development dollars. Europe's clinical research footprint has also slipped as companies favor regions with simpler, faster, and more predictable pathways. For decades, this was the United States. We capitalized on what Europe lost. But as we've covered in past episodes, China is increasingly making progress. In 2023, China overtook Europe for the first time in the number of new molecular entities discovered. Incubate's takeaway from all of this and this incredible European sentiment story: we can't assume that the U.S. will stay the global magnet for biotech talent and capital. If we want the next generation of breakthroughs and jobs, manufacturing, and national security advantages that come with them, we need policies that protect the innovation engine. What does that mean? It means rejecting MFN-style international reference pricing that undermines long-horizon investment incentives. Why would we import the very systems Europe has when it's so clearly disrupted their ability to bring new medicines to market and to be a hub of global biopharmaceutical leadership? Second, we have to defend strong patent rights and reliable IP as the foundation of biotech financing and technology transfer. We were pleased to see the Secretary of Commerce walk away from ideas that would have weakened the IP environment. Third, we have to preserve a stable, predictable regulatory environment so companies can plan trials and investors can underwrite risk. And finally, we have to support capital formation and exit pathways so successful innovations can recycle into the next wave of startups. You know, the recent deal with Metsera had an interesting story, not just about the battle between two large companies to buy Metsera, but it also showed that the capital invested was being rewarded and could be reinvested. It's not that that capital left the system. That capital is just going to find a new home and a new medicine to bring to market. Our last headline on that point about FDA stability is timely because the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Chairman, Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, released a discussion paper about what can be done to improve the FDA. Came out on Tuesday, and we're still digging through it, but it's called The Patient and Families First, Building the FDA of the Future. The paper discussed how FDA review can feel like an unpredictable black box, which can dampen investment and slow the path from discovery to patients. Several solutions are proposed that generally focus on reducing red tape and improving efficiency, making reviews more consistent and predictable, modernizing evidence generation and clinical trials. The paper in particular highlights the shift towards decentralized and adaptive trial designs. One idea discussed, a voluntary pilot similar to Australia that streamlines oversight for certain low-risk phase 1 studies, so U.S. trials can start faster. The white paper also hit on software, AI, and digital health, arguing that device pathways haven't kept pace with fast-moving software and recommends exploring updated or supplemental pathways so those products have a more efficient, appropriate route to market. And of course, the important coordination so that AI standards don't conflict across government. To Chair Cassidy's team, we look forward to digging in further in these and coming back with the investor perspective on these important proposals. A closing thought here at Making Medicine. President Trump will deliver his first official State of the Union of his second term on Tuesday. So recording today, this is our last episode before he gives those important remarks that sets the direction for the country and his party going into the midterms. Every pollster in the world thinks that he has to touch on affordability, and it is almost inevitable that the president will bring up his efforts to lower the cost of prescription drugs. But Incubate has seen some private polling, and it's been released today by Max Baer, our friend over at Endpoints News, showing that lowering the cost of prescription drugs isn't just at the top of the list for Americans on addressing affordability, it's at the bottom of the list. In fact, when asked if Congress could only focus on one thing right now, what should it focus on? Lowering the cost of groceries, lowering the cost of health insurance, lowering the cost of housing, and lowering taxes all round out effectively the majority of the survey. Lowering the cost of prescription drugs only scored 2%. We just want to reflect on that for a moment. With midterms only 9 months away and primaries heating up over the next couple weeks, this poll is striking. Americans are giving a clear direction to parties on both sides, and the numbers are the same, Democrat or Republican. Americans want to see Congress focusing on lowering the cost of groceries, the cost of health insurance, and the cost of housing. It barely registered that they should pursue proposals related to price controls. That's incredibly striking to us, and a good reminder to the Trump administration as they go into the State of the Union to learn the lesson that the Biden administration learned. Price controls don't meaningfully benefit patients, and they cast a doubt that future medicines will come to market. That's not what Americans are looking for. That wraps up this episode of the Making Medicine podcast. Thank you again to Jef for joining us today. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube and follow us on other channels. Thanks for listening, and as always, keep innovating.